Okay, thank you, Malcolm. I should start with a disclaimer. Until last Friday, I was the chair of Solace Scotland. I'm now the past chair, I'm pleased to say, of Solace Scotland, and a great weight has been lifted from my shoulders as a consequence. So I'm looking forward to my new designation, which is Father of the House, so far as my colleagues are concerned. What I'm going to talk about really is something that's work in progress, and I feel as though I'm a little unfortunate in having to follow such an excellent presentation this morning. I'm sure you'll agree, not just in terms of the quality of what I'm going to say, but also in terms of the fact that it is work in progress, whereas what we saw, I think, was quite a compelling account of a piece of work that, although it continues, is already delivering results. So that contrast will be obvious to you, perhaps, as I work my way through this. And it's taken us about 2 years to get to where we are just now, and we're almost there, but not quite. And I'm going to try and summarise 2 years' worth of endeavour in 10 minutes. So here goes. First thing I want to say about this is that this piece of work on benchmarking for local government is very much our own initiative. Solace is leading on it, but it's led by local government as a whole. It's not something that's being done to us. Indeed, the opportunity to do it arises because those who have been doing it to us, and there may well be some in the audience, particularly the Accounts Commission, have stood back a little bit from this territory and said, we don't think we should occupy this, you should be doing this, this should be self-driven, it should be owned by you, it should be part of your overall approach to improvement and self-evaluation. So that challenge was upon us, really, to occupy territory that previously had been occupied by others. And really the view we took at the beginning was that there was a major gap, or rather two major gaps. The first one was about information, i.e. data, and the second, and for me actually more important gap, was around activity, i.e. the use of that data, and I'll try to reflect on some of those as I go through this. The purpose, really, you could summarise in 2 points. There were two purposes, I think, to what we're trying to do. First one is to drive improvement, and that, I think, directly relates to what's now become one of the 4 pillars that John Swinney spoke about. So we feel as though we actually managed to get in slightly ahead of the curve there. We've got to be pushing very hard at this, and the particular focus that we felt was missing, this is one of the gaps, was around the relationship between efficiency, cost if you like on the one hand, and product or benefit on the other, the quality of the services. So the strapline that I used in the 1 year that I was chair of Solace was, in the current environment we have to get better for less. That really summarises this, and that's what this benchmarking is designed to help us to do. And we want to try and make that best practice, as I put it here, viral. And the means by which we want to do that is to have chief executives and chief officers use this data, as opposed to having it disseminated somewhere else in the organisation, owned by policy people who need to analyse that for us, but then an uphill struggle from there to get it embedded into the delivery of services on the ground. We need to lead from the front on this, and that was very much part of how we designed the process. The second main objective, as you see there, was to strengthen accountability, and I think that's the other side of the coin. For me, the two go hand in hand. One of the things that will drive us very hard to improve public services is a degree of transparency about how well, or in some cases, how not so well, we are currently doing, and that in comparative terms. So those two key issues for us, driving improvement, strengthening accountability, they're really, for us, the twin pillars of what this work is about. A brief word about the indicators themselves. There's about 65 of them, and we're just about there with the final number. That's a lot. But you have to bear in mind that local government provides a wide range of services, and we wanted not to be universal about this. It's a pretty broad sweep, but we wanted to make sure we were hitting the key notes. Again, one of the points that came out in this morning's presentation. This is a way of getting at the things that do matter. And if you think about the range of services, it actually only works out at about a handful of top-line indicators for all the major services that we run, including things like education and social work. So I think we've been pretty parsimonious about this, and we could quibble about whether that's the right number or something else should be in there, but we just have to get on with these things, and that's the view that we've taken on this. So the characteristics of the indicators, or the criteria that we've used to select them, are up there for you to read, and I'm not going to rattle through it. The key ones for me would be relevance. They have to be about things that matter, and in all fairness to the regime that we've been subject to over years, that has not always been a dominant characteristic of the indicators that we statutorily had to follow, and the agencies that promoted those indicators would acknowledge as much. So that was part of the shift of ownership. If you don't think they're very good, design your own and then work with them, and that was the challenge that we undertook. And I think the other challenge that needs pointing out here is the issue about consistency. And for this to work, for it to be the basis of any kind of comparison and benchmarking, it has to be consistently applied across services and across councils and over time. Because only that is going to support the practice, which is, for me, just as important as the material itself, the practice of benchmarking. Some of my colleagues don't like this expression of can openers. I'm not a great fan of it myself, but you know what it gets at. There are more questions than answers, to quote the song. And really what these are designed to do is to give people like chief executives and chief officers the right kind of questions with the right kind of information so that we can follow these through to a conclusion that will lead to improvement. It's worth just bearing in mind some of the caveats here. Again, people in this room will be perfectly familiar with this, but it does matter what kind of context you're operating in. Just taking data on its own and putting it out there invites, I think, misunderstanding and misrepresentation. There could well be reasons why, legitimate reasons why, some of the differences that we can see from the raw data that we already have exist. To take an example, my own authority, if we've got higher waste collection costs than most people, that's likely to be because it's a policy priority for my council in particular to be one of the greenest councils in the country and to minimise our landfill. So the other side of that coin, which the evidence also shows, is that in fact we've got the highest levels of recycling in Scotland. So you have to look at this holistically and you have to put things in context, fairly obvious points. And there is a trade-off between costs and benefits on this, and a number of the indicators that we have attempt to represent that trade-off and to merge cost of an activity with the kind of output that we're getting from that activity. All of which, I say, is integral to the overall process of self-evaluation, which seems to me to be the bedrock of improvement. It's something we should be driving for ourselves, assisted by external agencies, but not in any way pushed by them. So, as I say, this is at least as much about practice as it is about the indicators themselves. The last area that I wanted to touch on very briefly was a very important area about reporting. And reporting for us has to be public, it's got to be local, and it's got to be consistent. The way that we envisage launching this will be that it will be within the duty that we already have under legislation for public performance reporting. And that's a duty on each individual council, not a duty on local government as a whole. So we will encapsulate this and report it in that fashion using the device that's already there. That's where the local context comes in. It will be each council's own local report. And if that can be fashioned in a way that puts this material into a proper environment, then we can manage some of the presentation and some of the risks that I'll come on to in a moment that I think this invites. And in order to make sure that we've got a right balance between what we want to say about ourselves locally and what people will want to understand about local government as a whole, we're trying to get some consistency about the presentation, both in terms of the graphs and tables that we use, and indeed in terms of some of the narrative. And I just wanted to finish with one or two little illustrations to put some flesh on the bones of what it is that I mean by that. This would be an example of a graph that would operate at quote-unquote national level, i.e. all 32 councils' data would be in a graph like this. This particular one just happens to show the percentage change in secondary school costs per pupil over a 3-year period. And I think that nicely captures another aspect of what we're trying to do here, which is to show trends over time as well as a snapshot in time, because clearly improvement is a journey. It's not something that just happens once and is then forgotten. So that would show for any council where they stood in that kind of that range, if you like, on that particular measure. And then, and for me, actually more importantly, at the local level, and what that really means is your benchmarking club. Now, we're still working on how those clubs will be formed, but you won't be surprised to hear that we'll use the same kind of methodology for that as is currently used by inspection and audit agencies, and by and large it comes down to common socio-economic factors so that we're getting a valid set of comparisons. So this is a made-up example, we haven't got that yet, but if you took that as an illustration, if I were the chief executive of one of those would be the people I would be talking to ask the question, why are you there and I'm only here? And of course that's the benefit of the whole exercise. Now, I said that there were some risks associated with this, and the Cabinet Secretary pointed out perhaps the main one this morning, the media. Well, risks just have to be managed. They can't be eliminated in this. You can just imagine how people will interpret that kind of data when it's out there, even if we didn't put it out in that fashion. The fact that it's there means that it can be elicited from FOIs or what have you. So we will be looking very much to public sector colleagues, people in this room, and national politicians to stand alongside us when this goes out and not allow people to be picked off or cowed into withdrawing from this because, as it happens in the first instance, they, in some indicator, turn out to be bottom of somebody's drawn up league table. So I think it's really important that the spirit of collaboration that today is largely about applies when it's put to the test in this kind of situation. It's about improvement, as John Swinney said this morning. It's not about condemnation. Finally, just a gesture to what the future might look like. This is drawn from a publication that's issued every year by our counterparts in Sweden. Swedish local government encompasses a wider range of services than Scottish, so this particular example refers to the proportion of the population who consider themselves to have access to the care they need. I just happened to pick a health service one, I could have picked others. But you can see very clearly there is a league table on display. It's taken 10 years in Sweden to get to that situation, and they describe quite graphically the nature of that journey and some of the bruises that they've acquired on the way there. But I think it is worth considering that as an endpoint in this journey. I don't think we can go there quite yet, but it's comforting to know that somebody else has done it and that they didn't find it plain sailing, because I don't imagine that we will either. Tables like that in that report are accompanied by a full narrative which contains some useful analysis and begins to explain why the picture looks like this, and prompts the question for individual organisations, well, if it looks like this nationally, why are you where you are in this particular table? So helpfully, it's a step-by-step approach to understanding the data. It's clearly very open, very accountable, and not without its difficulties, but potentially, for us, it could be the shape of things to come. So really, that's as much as I wanted to say to give you a quick flavour of what we're about. More than happy to try to answer any questions or comments that colleagues might have about that. Thank you.